But we must carry on this discussion another time.
Okay.
Resume, right?
Yep.
So you're talking about aspirations, yeah?
Yeah. So, Prof. Kirpal, tell us about the aspirations of Singaporeans. So, do you think that Singaporeans and even individuals from Southeast Asia are prepared, to look at the consequences, to aspire and succeed in life, because it can be very difficult.
Yeah. I think, we have to look at societies, right? You look at nations. If you think of happiness, and everybody is talking about happiness or the lack of in Singapore, right? So it's a terrible indictment of Singapore. I mean, here we have this wonderful metropolis. Everybody thinks we are rich, we are well poised to be the New York of the East and all of that, and yet nobody seems to be happy. So it's a real issue, right? I think people aspire to what they have been taught, and I use this in inverted commas, what they've been taught to aspire towards. Very unfortunately for us in Singapore, we are suffering what America went through in the 60s. Okay? So there was a generation that worked very, very hard to build the foundations for a better society. Okay? And I take pride in the fact that I think it was my generation, okay, that did that. That means people who are now 60, 70, my vintage, right? I'm going to be 64. So, I mean, our parents practically had nothing. You know what I mean? When they either came from India or China or even some from Malaysia. I mean, the politics of that is very complicated, but they came here to make a decent living, to work very hard and build a small foundation. But when it came to our turn, we were a little bit more privileged than our parents. We worked very, very hard, we built something, and now our children are taking what we didn't take for granted, and that was a comfortable life. However, a comfortable life is not the same as a happy life. Especially if comfort is defined, as I fear in Singapore, and this is a big issue now, it is defined by branded goods, by a materialistic outlook on life. You know what I mean? So you find that in Singapore, though we talk a lot about philanthropy, we talk about being gracious and all of that, the point is that by and large, most Singaporeans are really not bothered. What they want is more branded goods. What they want is a higher income. What they want is success defined, quite sadly, defined only in terms of the dollar, right? So you think of successful people, it's usually the rich. It's not, the successful writer or the successful, discus thrower or the successful bodybuilder. I mean, these guys may get a billing once in a while, but even then it's a very token kind of thing. I mean, the real people who run Singapore are your property guys, right? Your property tycoons and all of that. So I think aspiration partly depends on how we educate our young. Unfortunately, in Singapore, the role models of success were always the financial tycoons, the business types. You know what I mean? In other words, those with money. It was not those with a gift for poetry or those with a gift for language or those with a gift for critical thinking or anything of that sort. No, right? So you cannot, in a sense, blame the young for wanting to aspire towards riches, because that's the only thing they've always been exposed to for many years. And I think this is where my advocacy is for the capacity for the young to be able to think on their feet, right? For example, there are a lot of sex and scandals now. I asked the other day, I asked a couple of my own students, right? They're supposed to be quite bright and good. I asked them, I said, look, as the year comes to an end, a lot of people say that, the sex scandals carried the thing. But I said, can you tell me what are the longer term implications of, say, the Ng Boon Kay case? What do you think? How do you analyze this? They were totally handicapped. They didn't know how quite to analyze. They're so caught up in the thrill of it. They're so caught up in the smallness of it. They're so caught up in the horrible details of it, which I thought there was no need for the media to go into and all of that. They forget the larger picture, right? Now, when I was in Malaysia last week, somebody said, hey, Kirpal, it's good to know that Singapore is normal, Now he used the word normal because Malaysia, sex and scandals are part and parcel of their almost daily political life, right? They have it, they go around. I mean, there's Anwar being charged, this and that thing. They're all still laughing and talking and joking, right? But in Singapore, this thing has become like on everybody's imagination. It's as if there's not much more to Singaporeans than this sex and scandal gossip. Do you know what I'm trying to say? So I think, if you ask me, I'm really nervous because what's happened is a lot of the young in Singapore are taking for granted the foundations which their parents built, and they are spending recklessly. They all want the good life. Somebody told me quite cheekily the other day, one way that the clever Singaporeans doing it is to get a 5-room HDB flat from the government, sell it, go downwards to a 4-room, get the cash, spend. Then from 4-room you downgrade to 3-room, get the cash and spend. By the time you do this twice, it's like 15 years overall, right? So you've lived a good life. But if you leverage on, twice or thrice what your earning capacity is, then sooner or later you're going to go down what America went through recently, the property crisis. You know what I mean? And there are Singaporeans who earn maybe 15,000 a month, but their spending habits are like 25,000 a month, right? So they got the credit card, so they're leveraging 100%, 200% more than what their earning capacity really is. All right. So the banks are in a way culprits as well because they provide all this. And then when the foreclosures begin to happen, and I think if we're not careful, this will start 10, 12 years from now, it's going to be a real problem for these people because then, there'll be not only the emperor with no clothes, there'll be all these young people suddenly finding themselves in a situation where they have no homes, there's no houses, they've got really nothing much to show for it because everything was built on the tomorrow that somehow never happens. Because every time the tomorrow comes with a promise, they spend more than they should. I grew up in an environment where to owe anybody was not considered a very good thing, right? So we're very frugal with what we spend, People still say this guy is a multi-millionaire, but why when he goes to the market, he argues about 20 cents with the lady selling vegetables. You know what I mean? Like, come on, what's the difference between $2 and $2.20? Give her the 20 cents and make her happy, right? But no, because we were brought up to be very frugal on these things. But not the young. The young will say, how much this cost? 100? Oh, give me a better one that costs about 200. They want everything better. Everything better is measured in very simple and simplistic money terms. And I think this is wrong, right? And this is complacency. And so the Singaporean today has to realize that this cannot go on. Like the Greeks are realizing it, the Spanish are realizing it, the Italians are going to realize it very soon. They're all suffering from excess. You know what I mean? If you become nothing but a consumer, consumerism has a way of sucking us in, right? Because it's very nice, right? We spend here, we drink a lot of champagne, we drive the best cars, we stay in first class hotels. Everything is beautiful. Why change it? You know what I mean? And nobody is in a hurry to change it. But sooner or later, reality catches up. Because there's only so much you can print money. There's only so much your credit card can expend to. After which somebody will say, hey, time to now pay up. You don't have it? Well, I take this, I take everything that you've got. And then you realize, oh my God, that's bad. Because they are young at that point, right? You say, wow, I thought daddy was okay, but what's happening, So in other words, we are not guaranteeing a good future for our young, right? Not my generation, but say my children's generation. They are not guaranteeing the future of their young. And so to me, in some ways, it is actually not surprising that many of these young people don't want to have babies, because they just want to live it themselves. They're pretty selfish in that way, right? And by the time they realize that life without kids is actually not always very happy, they are too late. It's too late to have babies. So, it's such a very sad situation that so many of our young women and men are trying so desperately now to have babies in their 40s, right? When it's a little bit too late. They should have had it 10, 20 years ago, before that, when they were in their 20s, they should have thought of that. Now, if you think of Malaysia, you think of Thailand and all that, they've got a different problem. Their problem is they've got all the babies, they're very happy, they're quite capable of making more babies, no real problem to them, but they don't have the wherewithal, they don't have the resources, they don't have the air conditioners, they don't have the technology, the means to sort of show that they are also as progressive as say the Singaporean. So this creates in the Singaporean a very brash and bratty attitude. It creates in our neighbours a kind of envy, right? Because branded goods are what Hollywood is made of, the glamour, the glitz, and all of that. The gizmos are always exciting. But I think in the end, our neighbours might actually have the last laugh if we are not careful. And this is where my advice to my fellow Singaporeans is, take a step or two back and think a little bit more seriously about what you really want out of life. And do you really need $1 million every year to survive? I don't think so. I mean, there are people who are surviving on 60,000, 40,000 a year, right? And there's some of them who are surviving on 40,000, supporting 3-4 other people in the family. So you don't need $1 million, just one person to spend on high cars and high living and, you know, expensive drinks and expensive shoes and all of that. I think, you know, it's priorities. Right? At the end, I think, you know, the Bible says, if you live by the sword, you may die by the sword. And I think, you know, I would paraphrase that to say that Singaporeans are living by the dollar and they'll die by the dollar if they're not careful.
Then what is happiness? How can a person live a happy life? You know, what is happiness for you? Because you're a poet.
Okay, so if you think about it, even though I said earlier on that religion is one of those very sensitive areas, right? You find that all religions have some idea of heaven, right? And the people who somehow seem to be admitted to heaven are not admitted, at least as far as I know, not admitted on the basis of how many millions they have, right? But maybe on how many millions they gave others to make the life of others also equally happy or at least a little bit more decent. And I think in that way, of course, happiness is, you know, to each person his own or her own. But I think by and large, to be happy, you must be able to sit back, look straight at yourself in the mirror, look straight into your own eyes and say, I have done good. Then you can say that I'm happy.
Now,
because there's superficial happiness, which is material acquisition, and there's inner happiness, deep happiness. I mean, to me, it's very, very surprising that so often we read about this very rich but totally disenchanted and disillusioned at the end. You know, on their deathbed, most of them said, you know, all these millions, at the end of the day, what have they done for me? Not very much. Do you know what I mean? And I think this is a lesson that we don't talk about enough, we don't share enough, because we feel that it's sour grapes or it's, you know, bad or not so nice, you know. So if you ask me, I mean, in the end, happiness is a real state of the mind. You know, a long time ago, I invited this guy called Kit Lee from Malaysia, right? And he came and he said, there are two ways you can drink coconut water, right? You can just go to Katong or Bedok, you know, and there are guys somewhere, you can ask them to pluck a coconut, or you can buy a coconut from the hawker stall, it costs $2 maybe, or you can go into Shangri-La and buy it for $18. You know what I mean? What's your priority? Right? If you think you can only be happy if you pay $18 for the coconut in Shangri-La, then that's you, right? But what I can do is go to the simple hawker center, buy a $3 coconut. Compared to 18, I still have something like, you know, $15 spare, which I can buy an extra plate of rice. I might even have $10 spare to give someone else to buy a plate of rice or 2 plates of rice. You know what I mean? But if you do it at Shangri-La, you don't have that. You don't have that freedom, you don't have that choice, you don't have the opportunity. Why? Because you're denying yourself of that, because you think that $18 drink is superior to the $3 coconut that you buy.
Well
right?
said.
Simple analogy, right?
Well said. You know, but well said, Dr. Kirpal. You know, but many of us also, why do you choose to be a poet, and how do you come about decide that you should start writing poetry at a young age?
Well, it's very curious. Last time when I was talking with some boys, my vintage old schoolboy gathering, we talked about this, and I've always maintained that it was my teachers in primary school, right, that really encouraged me to write poetry. Because I think the idea of poetry is at the heart of it, the idea of being able to think in terms of metaphor. In other words, it's towards creative thinking, towards a kind of lateral thinking. And so you're always thinking of the alternative rather than of the linear. And so, because I was an only child, and I grew up, for years just being the only sort of person at home for hours and hours on end, because my uncle who brought me up was working, and he would leave, home at about 7:30 in the morning. He wouldn't get home till 9 at night. So I was basically alone, and it was my job to cook and get the meals and feed the Alsatian dogs that my uncle loved, and water the 1,000 orchids that we had, orchid plants and all that. But that gave me a lot of freedom while doing all the chores of the house from a young age, 8 and 9, to just do nothing but imagine. You know what I mean? So as a young kid, I would just sit in corners, imagine, and my uncle had a fantastic library, and he never censored me. Right? He had Playboy magazines lying all over the place. He had, the Communist Manifesto lying somewhere. He had his personal diary notes to Lee Kuan Yew and other things, on a corner. Because he was involved in politics and I left politics. And I had the freedom to sort of look at all these things as I was growing up. And among the books that he had were these wonderful anthologies of poetry. And these were things that I would pick up. And, I didn't make much sense of it. I didn't understand very much. But the rhythms, the sound, the language, they appealed to me. And that was very, very important. The words were very, very important. And from very young, my uncle impressed upon me the need to know a word in the fullness of it. You know what I mean? So if you take the simple word bar, it can be a bar of soap, and it can be a bar like a barrier. It can be a bar like a kind of legality that you need to cross, like lawyers entering the bar. Or it could be a bar where you have beer and brandy, So you have to know the fullness of the word. And this is what poetry is all about. Knowing each word in its fullest significance. And that's what I try to do. And I'm very attracted to that. And I love people who are also in the same kind of mode. So from young I've been reading a lot of poems. A lot of poets. Most of my friends around the world are poets in terms of writers. It doesn't mean that I don't respect the novelists and the dramatists and all of that. I do. Also, I think it's a matter of gift and talent. I find that I was blessed with a gift to express myself poetically. I also do some short story writing. 2 of my short story collections have been published. A couple of my short stories have been quite widely anthologized around the world. But that's not what I'm known for. You know what I mean? I'm known for poetry rather than fiction. Okay? I'm working on a novel, by the way, that may or may not happen. And this is again interesting. You see, we live in an age when, people are not very inclined to read poetry and poets. You know what I mean? Because it is difficult. It's really difficult to engage with a poem beyond the superficial. Right? Whereas with a novel, it's quite entertaining. You've got 3 hours, you've got nothing to do, you're waiting at the airport for your flight. It's good to pick up a novel and just read because you've got good characterization, you've got good, plot, there's a bit of drama going on. And that's fine. After that, you can put your book away and go into your flight and be very happy. Right? But if you read a poem and the poem raises an issue, you're thinking like, what did he try to say? When he said, to live is good, but to live truthfully is better. What the hell was he trying to tell me? You're irritated, you know what I mean? You're engaged. You say, shit man, what does it mean by this? To live well is good, but to live truthfully is better. Shit, am I living truthfully? Was he provoking me? Why did he have to do that? Why should I read this guy who's trying to provoke me and make me irritated? Forget about him. Let me just read another novel and be happy with the story.
Amazing. Now you have a few books on hand that you would like to tell us more about.
Sure.
Yeah, because you have a book on mythology and interlock, as well as the best of Kirpal Singh. Most of you may not know. Please get hold of his book at all leading bookstores or even on Amazon.com.
Well, I mean, let me begin by saying that I am not responsible for the title. All right. In fact, the title, "The Best of Kirpal Singh," is really actually quite worrisome and problematical, because it sort of makes a summative statement. Like, this is the best, meaning I'm incapable of providing anything that'll be better than this. Right? The best is over. So I've got difficulties with that. But the publisher wanted to put this up in a series, and this is called the Singapore Pioneer Poets, right? And so the three of us, Edwin Tambu was my teacher, Edwin Tambu, Robert Yeo, and myself were chosen as the first string to go into this. And actually in that order, because Tambu is more or less 10 years older than Robert, and Robert is about 7 or 8 years older than I am. So in a way we have got three of us, but we're all past 60, so that's that. So that's the best of Kirpal Singh. And I mean, without being too immodest, I would say that it does contain some of the better poems that I've written, either by my own judgment, or by the judgment of my editors, or by judgment of people around the world who have decided that when they comment on their poetry and they pick up poems and all that. So that's one. That's quite a thing. Let me just say a few words about this, Robin, because this one, diversity, is very, very interesting. See the way it is. See the way they have written diversity, diverse city, right? And this is the city of Austin, Texas, in America. And they invited me for their 20th anniversary poetry festival. They're big. The Austin Poetry Festival is one of the best known in the world. And there's this wonderful anthology that they bring up. And I don't know, Robin, if you have time for me to read the poem that I featured here.
Please.
One of the things that the Austin Poetry Festival does is it brings together, 200, sometimes 300 writers from around the world, and it's quite amazing what goes on at the festival itself, because all of us get there, and of course somebody quite rudely or quite cheekily said, this is a poetry wank. But what it does is that it brings together these very, very exciting people from around the world, and what we tend to do is to be able to not only get together and share our poems with each other and the public. I mean, it's amazing in Texas when you're there for this kind of a poetry festival. I mean, people that you would not expect to be part of your audience, actually pay money, right, to attend your readings and, enjoy, and they interact with you, they engage with you. I mean, I wish that Singapore could be more and more like Austin, a city where poetry, I won't say is celebrated, but poetry celebrates the city. Do you know what I mean? And it is in this way, diverse. They're also talking about diversity, tending to creativity, but also the whole idea of the verse coming alive when you read. So this is the poem they chose from me this year. It's called My Poem. My poem is for those who ask for nothing but give, even unasked. My poem is for those who have been dimmed by the darkness around. My poem is for those who must realize how they hurt when they disappoint. My poem is for those who are humble and free and share generously. My poem is especially for my grandmother, who one night cradled me in her strong arms and pointed to the stars and the moon and said, "Let them be your guide." My poem. That's one. They only chose one poem each from the poets who were there. And the last book that I brought today to share with everybody listening into this program is Interlogue. This is Interlogue Volume 8.
Wow.
Now, in 1998, I talked with Ethos, a Singaporean publisher, probably Singapore's best-known publisher for literature, to initiate a series called Studies in Singapore Literature. So this was the first time a sustained study of Singaporean literature has been able to be put on the international publishing platform. So this is an ongoing series. It's called the Interlogue series. And interlogue is a word I created, like dialogue and multilogue. It's interlogue, connecting between reader and the person who is featured in the book, or the people who are featured in the book. And it creates a very, very dynamic kind of engagement. So I'm very proud to have been the general editor of this. I'm still the general editor of this, the founding editor of this series. And I told the publishers that I'm going to stop when volume 10 appears. So there's volume 9 and volume 10, and after that it's time for me to take a back seat and let somebody younger come up and do this. Now the reason why I think a book like Interlock is so important is that in what I may call newer cultures from the Western perspective, Singapore, Malaysia, Philippines and all of this, we need to pay serious critical attention to our writers, study them. Like the American professors studying the American poets and writing about them in an open, honest, frank kind of way. And this is what Interlock attempts to do, to put Singaporean literature on the world map in a scholastic sense. So it's not just airy-fairy, waffle and all of that. It is real scholarship. And each essay in the book, each article that is written, each book that is devoted to an entire author, like volume 7 belongs to Edwin Thumboo in Interlock. I think volume 5 is on Robert Yeo, whole book studying him. So these researchers, take 3-4 years to write these whole books. And this is why, even though the series was officially launched in the year 2000, we are in 2012, we are only still at volume 8 that is finished. Volume 9 and 10 is still coming. So it's like an average of 1 volume a year, roughly, give or take. And it's a very, very exciting series. And if you ask me of all the books, what I'm proudest of, I would say is the Interlock series. Because I think it is incumbent upon, a writer, whether a poet or whatever, incumbent upon academic or a teacher like myself, to leave something so that others coming after me or who are alongside with me will be able to share in the joy of what we do and what we do best. And I think it's also a way of proving to the world that do not think that just because Singapore has the famous Marina Bay Sands and Resorts World Sentosa and the F1 and all of that, night safaris, that we don't have our cultural accompaniments. We do. It's only that our people somehow have never been given enough of the emphasis, enough of prioritization of the literature that we are producing. Somebody said, a nation without a literature is like a nation without history. And I want to set that right. I want to say that Singapore is a nation with a great literature, with a great history, but what we do need is to know that along the way we got a little bit carried away, we got skewed in our path, and therefore we need to bring things back to the center and once again reprioritize what is important and what will contribute to your earlier question about defining happiness. Because poetry is in fact about happiness. Poetry is about the individual's search to be a happy, well-aware, current and dynamic being. But at the center of that being and that dynamism and that vitality is a humanity that we cannot deny. And that humanity belongs to everybody.
Amazing. Now, speaking about humanity that belongs to the universe, including yourself, you had a very interesting background of where you're coming from, and of course your son that's growing up, knowing, and has a privilege of knowing you better than I do. But if you were to depart from this universe, that is,
it's not a question of if, Robin, it's when. And the end may well by be near.
Yeah, and of course we have survived the Mayan theory. What would you, or what advice would you and legacy would you leave behind for your family and your friends here in this age?
Let me answer this by a slightly detour kind of way, right? Or detoured kind of way. Over Christmas we all get a lot of greetings and thank you cards, that kind of thing. So as a teacher, and then especially as an older teacher, I get lots of these, right? And I have this wonderful thank you card come from a student whose business is doing very well in the Middle East. And he said, Prof. Kirpal, I want to thank you again and again. I cannot thank you enough for how you guided me. And now that I'm doing very well, I just want to, tell you how happy I am, but I also want to share my success with you. And so he said, like, when can you take me out to lunch or dinner and those kinds of things. And so I wrote back to him and I said, Vincent, success measured purely in monetary terms is only the start. It's the very basic, it's the simplest kind of success. The larger success is, how do you define your own success? I said, the one thing you should never compromise on is your integrity. In the world of money making, it is so easy to be tempted, to take the easy way out, to take the shortcut, instead of working hard, developing something that's really solid, that's going to last, and as you said, that's going to leave a legacy. So if you ask me what legacy I would like to leave, one of the earlier books of poetry that I edited in Singapore is called Articulations. And if you turn to the back of the book, it was published in 1972. Seems like, ages ago, right? 1972. You're not born yet, right? What year were you born?
No,
you were not born.
No.
Yeah, you were younger, you see. So in 1972. Now at the back of Articulations, I have a little statement. And it begins with open inverted commas, ... and it says, and through such sharing to become more human. Unquote. And I think it is that human sharing, that talking to each other, with each other, among people, in an honest, non-harmful, non-intimidating kind of way, that is going to take us forward into the next world. It's a brilliant world that's going to come, It's only a few of us, those privileged ones, will be the beneficiaries of that wonderful new sort of heaven on earth. It's like a new Jerusalem is going to be created. And I think this is what living is all about. And if in my life as an educator, as a husband, as a father, as a friend, as a teacher, as an associate, as a professional colleague, I have been able to pass on a little bit of that joy of life and the joy of living in an honest, integral kind of way, then I would say that I have been okay.
Well, thank you, Kirpal, for joining us
Thank
here
you.
at the National Critics' Choice. And folks, thank you for joining me at the Stienberg Review. I'm Robin Stienberg, your host. And please do get hold of Dr. Kirpal's books on Amazon. And if not, you can always look up for him by Google him. And once again, Happy New Year and have a good week ahead.
Thank you very much. Yep. Wonderful.
Cool.
Okay.
Oh, yeah. Oh, that's
Good.